The internet is a dangerous place, but maybe not in the way that you think. It's not just the hackers or the viruses or the shady pop-ups that we get while scrolling, even though we know those can lead to our privacy and even our bank accounts being compromised. But the real danger? The people. Because if you think about it, behind all of those scams are people who pretend to be someone they're not. People who slide into your DMs with sweet words and promises. But behind the screen, they're spinning a web of lies. The scariest part is that people fall for this every single day. We've seen it happen. Recently, there was a story going viral about a widow who thought she was dating Brad Pitt. And I'm being serious. The real Brad Pitt, the actor, had fallen in love with her online, and she sent him thousands of dollars, convinced that they would be together forever, only to realize too late that Brad was just another scammer, laughing at her in all of her desperation. It's cruel. And I think a lot of times we think, oh, I'll never fall for that. And I get it. I don't think I would either. But there are other schemes that aren't as obvious. There was a guy who thought he landed his dream job. A recruiter from a huge company messaged him offering a 6-figure salary. They even sent him a signing bonus, and they let him order a company laptop. But the day before he was supposed to start, the emails just stopped. This new company, it didn't exist. And that signing bonus, it was actually a scam that drained his entire bank account. If that's not bad enough, there are cases that don't just ruin lives, but they end them. Sadly, I recently talked about one of those cases, the case of Sydney Loof, who matched with a woman on Tinder. They planned a date, they hung out, they hit it off, and everything seemed normal until their second date. This time, Sydney never came home because her date wasn't who she claimed to be. The woman was actually working for a killer, and Sydney was never meant to survive. She was targeted and trapped for the mere desire of wanting to find love, and that is heartbreaking. We like to believe that we wouldn't fall for these tricks. We like to think we're too smart to be deceived. But the truth is, anyone can be fooled. And that's what makes today's case even more terrifying. Because the victim never knew that someone she never even met and never would meet was sitting behind a screen hundreds of miles away and had already decided that she was going to die. And all it took was a few messages. This is a story of how an online stranger convinced someone to do the unthinkable. It's a case of catfishing to the extreme, a scam so twisted, it actually turned into a murder. And trust me, by the time you hear this full story, you're gonna start to question every single person that you've ever talked to online. Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. I'm Kimbyrleigha, and if you've never been here before, it's nice to finally meet you. I think you can tell by now this case is going to revolve around the dangers of the internet. I don't know if this has ever happened to you, but I've had my personal data stolen. You probably have too. And you know what? I didn't even know it until about 9 months later. You'll finally just get an alert. And according to IBM, companies take an average of 277 days to report a breach. That means that criminals have 277 days ahead of you before you even know what hit you. And by the time that breach notification lands in your inbox, your identity could already be on sale on the dark web. Hackers, fraudsters, and identity thieves, they have free reign over your sensitive data. We all share our personal information, it's unavoidable. But with the data breaches happening every single week, our private details are constantly at risk. And what do companies offer when they finally come clean? Free credit monitoring. And weeks ago, I personally received an email just like that my information was taken, and they extended me that same offer. That's like installing security cameras after someone already broke into your house and stole everything and changed the locks. That's why I rely on our sponsor for today's video, Aura. Aura does more than just tell you when something bad has already happened. They actively monitor your personal information in real time across the dark web, data broker lists, and public court records, alerting you before criminals can do the damage. And if the worst does happen, they offer up to $5 million in identity theft insurance because the cost of recovering from fraud can be devastating. But Aura isn't just about monitoring. They offer an all-in-one security suite, a VPN with over 100 virtual locations to protect your online activity, a secure password manager to keep your login safe, antivirus software and tools to block malicious websites, data broker opt-outs so companies can't keep selling your information behind your back. And I get it. You've probably heard all of this before. And of course, data breaches are so common that you might as well be wearing a t-shirt with your social security number on it. But if you haven't been a victim yet, why keep leaving it to chance? I know that taking the right protective measures can feel very overwhelming. So let Aura handle the hard work for you. You can go to my link, aura.com/Kimber, to try it for free for 14 days. That'll be enough time for Aura to find out if any of your personal data is exposed, and then you can decide the next steps to take. Give it a try, and thanks so much to Aura for making this video possible. Now let's get into the case for today. What would you be willing to do for $9 million? I mean, you'd at least think about it, right? Because that's a lot of money. If someone just came up to you right now and offered you $9 million, no strings attached, what would you do? Would you take it? Would you even believe them? That someone could just give away millions of dollars? Now tell me, how much is a human life worth? Would you be willing to take a life for $9 million? Imagine you're 18 years old, you're broke, you've had a very traumatic childhood, and you're desperate for attention, approval, and love. And then you meet this rich guy, and he seems obsessed with you. He slides into your DMs. He promises you millions if you just do one thing. Just one thing. You have to take someone's life. I remember there was a movie like this back in the day. There was like this box and you could open it and something great would be inside waiting for you, kind of like Pandora's box, but the other side of Pandora's box, like the good things. But the thing is, when you did it, it would kill a random person. Well, this is not a movie. It's not a made-up horror story that I'm telling you today. I wish it was, because this really happened. And I'm going to warn you, the details of this case are disturbing, but they also expose something terrifying about the internet. And once you hear what happened, I promise you, and I said this before, you're never going to look at online strangers the same way ever again. Let me introduce you to Cynthia Hoffman first. She was never the kind of girl who saw the bad in anyone. If someone smiled at her, she smiled back. If someone needed help, she offered it. And if someone told her they were her friend, she believed them. She had always been this way. She was kind, trusting, and eager to fit in. Born on October 8th of 1999 in Anchorage, Alaska, Cynthia, known as Cece to those close to her, grew up as the middle child in a big, loud, loving family with her mother, Barbara Jean, and her father, Timothy Hoffman. She had 3 sisters, Samantha, Kimbyrleigha, and Rhea, and 3 brothers, Timothy Jr., Alex, and Jared. But the person she loved the most in the world was her father. To Cynthia, her dad was everything. While other kids spent their weekends scrolling through their phones or hanging out at the mall, Cynthia was helping her dad fix things. Their bond was built in wood and metal, screws and sawdust, because Timothy was a handyman, and Cynthia was his right-hand girl. If he was repairing a fence, she was holding the tools. If he was fixing a broken cabinet, she was right there beside him, eager to help. She could outwork any of us, he would say. She was always there working and learning and just happy to be with me. There wasn't a single person in the world Cynthia trusted more. And Cynthia's loving upbringing instilled in her values of compassion and empathy. She was a loyal friend and was always there to support those who needed her. Tim had always been very protective of his daughter. A lot of dads are, but Cynthia especially, because Cynthia was developmentally delayed. It made her see the world with childlike innocence. And Tim knew that not everyone had good intentions. People take advantage of girls like my daughter, he would say. They see someone who trusts too easily, and they use that. But Cynthia didn't believe this. She believed in people. Her trust in others had often made her a bit vulnerable, but it also highlighted how genuine she was. The Hoffman family made their home in Anchorage, Alaska, a city where urban life meets the wild, untamed beauty of the last frontier. It's known for its charming coffee shops, diverse restaurants, and tight-knit communities. Anchorage offers a unique balance of comfort and adventure. But just beyond the city's bustling streets, a different world unfolds. One of towering mountains, dense forests, and vast wilderness, stretching as far as the eye can see. Summers in Anchorage are a time of near endless daylight, where families like the Hoffmans took full advantage of the sun-drenched days, hiking rugged trails, fishing in crystal clear waters, and savoring the warmth before winter returned. But when the seasons would shift, so does the landscape. Winters in Alaska are long, dark, and unforgiving, with temperatures that can plummet to deadly lows. The wilderness, as beautiful as it is, demands respect. Because in Alaska, nature doesn't just surround you, it really dominates you. And for Cynthia's family, this was home. They loved it. They embraced the contrast of the seasons. They loved both outdoor activities and the quiet, everyday moments that made up their lives. And as a teenager, Cynthia loved being outdoors, she loved being active, but she was also dedicated to her education. She was exploring different paths for her future. She attended Robert Service High School, and then she expanded her skill set by taking even more courses at King Tech High School. And then after she graduated, she took a transitional program where you learn hands-on skills to prepare young adults for the workplace. And it was there that she developed a keen interest in welding, which would be great because she was gaining practical skills that could help her in her future with her dad's business. She was determined to also build a life of independence. Cynthia quickly secured a job at a local restaurant, and she really was proud of herself. She enjoyed the fast-paced environment and the opportunity to learn new skills and meet people. But as independent as she was trying to be, Cynthia's dad was still her rock. He ensured that she felt safe and supported and valued in every aspect of her life. And given her developmental delay, his protective instincts were even stronger. He wanted to shield her from the harsher realities of the world, while still encouraging her to embrace her potential. And Cynthia, in turn, leaned heavily on her father as a mentor and a confidant. She would text him multiple times an hour just to check in, sharing her thoughts and her feelings and her daily experiences. She knew that he would always be there to listen. More than anything, she wanted him to be proud of her, and her determination to succeed was evident in everything she did. She was looking forward to another big milestone, getting her driver's permit. To her, it was more than just a piece of plastic. It was another step towards independence. It was a sign that she was growing into the person she wanted to become. But as much as Cynthia cherished her relationship with her father, she really longed for something more. She wanted to build connections outside of her family and find friendships with people her own age, which is totally understandable. People who truly understood her. Like everyone else, she craved acceptance, companionship, and a sense of belonging. She just wanted to find someone who saw her for who she was and embraced her wholeheartedly. And it seemed this teenage dream of finding a BFF had finally come true. It started like any other normal high school friendship. Two teenage girls meeting up at the mall. It seemed like fate when Cynthia met Denali Bremer. The two clicked instantly. They bonded over shared experiences, inside jokes, and the simple joy of having someone who just got them. Both girls were attending Robert Service High School, and for Cynthia, this friendship wasn't just to have someone to talk to, it was a lifeline. It gave her confidence, a sense of belonging, and happiness that comes from knowing that you are not alone. Denali, whose birth name was Alexandria Baker, had a complicated story of her own. She was actually adopted as a child, and she was essentially born into violence. Her life was forever shaped by a tragedy that occurred when she was just 2 years old. According to Denali, her biological mother, Nicole House, had twin little girls, a girl named Corianne and Gabrielle. While they were newborn babies, her mother's boyfriend at the time was just really frustrated that they were crying, and he made this unthinkable decision that resulted in the death of one of those babies. He bashed them together and threw Gabrielle on the ground. Corianne barely survived, and sadly, Gabrielle did not make it through this horrific event. It shaped Denali's life in ways that she would never talk about. After growing up with foster parents, she knew what it was like to be different, to feel like an outsider, like you didn't belong. So these two girls really understood one another. Social media posts painted a picture of two inseparable best friends, laughing together, celebrating milestones, and capturing moments that made their bond look effortless. Cynthia's Facebook page was filled with snapshots of them side by side, their arms wrapped around each other at school events, including a dance where they smiled for the camera, and a caption read, "My BFF." But we know all too well, what we see online isn't the whole truth. Like many friends, they had their arguments, which were simple teenage disagreements, mostly about boys. Both Denali and Cynthia craved love and attention, and they often competed for it, especially with the boys in their social circle and the crushes. A lot of times they would have crushes on the same boys. This was still typical high school drama. They'd work it out, and soon they would be laughing and smiling together again. And I hope I'm not about to confuse you, but in case you see the name Angel, Denali went by that nickname online, so most of her posts and accounts had that name on it. It seemed like she liked to take on other identities, like she was kind of shedding her past by going by any name that wasn't her birth name or any given names. She was given the name Denali Dakota Sky Bremer after she was adopted, but she preferred to be called Angel at this phase in her life, and that's how Cynthia's dad, Tim, knew her. But I will continue calling her Denali. She was a regular visitor at the Hoffman residence, often spending a lot of time with Cynthia, whether it was watching movies or working on an art project. Tim appreciated this friendship, and he knew how important it was to Cynthia. She considered Denali her best friend. She was one of the cool kids. She was loud, confident, always had something funny to say, and Denali may have been Cynthia's best friend, but I'm going to be real with you. Denali didn't always treat Cynthia like she was her best friend. She talked over her, she made fun of the way that she spoke, and sometimes she would even tease her, I'm kind of doing air quotes here, tease her for being slow, those were her words, and then laugh it off like it was just a joke. But it never stopped, even when she knew that this wasn't nice. But Cynthia, it seemed like she never noticed. Or maybe she just didn't want to because she didn't want to lose her friend. That risk was just too much for her. Plus, every time Denali made her feel bad, she would flip a switch and say something nice to Cynthia, like it would cancel it out. Maybe she would compliment her hair or tell her she was beautiful and made Cynthia feel special again. Are you seeing any red flags? Because I was when I was reading this. Cynthia, she was sweet, she was trusting, and she would cling to those moments because she just wanted to be accepted. And Denali knew that. And that vulnerability can be very dangerous. Just like Timothy had always thought, Denali knew exactly how to control people and get her way. She learned a lot of defenses and coping mechanisms, and this is the kind of person that Timothy was scared for his daughter to be friends with and to be close to because she might fall victim of some kind of trap or some kind of lie or just overall mistreatment. That was his biggest fear, that someone would take advantage of his daughter. Sometimes people like Denali who have these learned defense mechanisms and coping mechanisms, they can sometimes use it for good, but with Denali, they were self-serving. Cynthia functioned at a 7th grade level despite being 19 in 2019. Looking back, there were many warning signs that Denali did not have Cynthia's best interest in mind. She was hot and cold. She made Cynthia chase after her approval time and time again, and it went something like this. One day, she would say, "Cynthia, you're my best friend. I love you." And then the next, she would ignore her text messages, pretend she wasn't there, and then suddenly, "Oh, I don't know what I would do without you." It was a game, and Cynthia didn't even realize that she was playing along. Denali held all the power. She decided when Cynthia felt included and when she felt like an outsider. And Cynthia just kept trying harder and harder to be liked. She would do anything to keep Denali happy. And it seemed like Denali wondered just how far she would go. And then something changed. Denali started acting different. She was always on her phone. She was always giggling at something, but never telling Cynthia what it was. She started talking about a boy, but not just any boy, the perfect guy. He was rich, she told Cynthia, like crazy rich. And then she showed Cynthia his profile picture. Handsome guy, maybe in his 20s, standing in front of a fancy car. "He's obsessed with me," Denali would say. "He says he's in love with me." And Cynthia never questioned it, because why would she? If Denali said it was true, then it was true. But remember, they would get into little arguments about guys, and as Denali would spend more time talking to her dream boy, Cynthia would feel left out, but she still considered Denali her best friend. Cynthia still thought they were going to graduate together, get jobs, and be lifelong friends. But it's heartbreaking that that would only be true for one of them. So let's jump to June 2nd of 2019. It should have been an ordinary summer day. It should have been. Tim was expecting his daughter Cynthia to stop by that evening because it became a normal part of their routine. She would come over to pick up her share of the money from a recent job they had worked on together. They'd chat about their next project, but Cynthia never showed up. And at first, Tim brushed it off. Maybe she lost track of time. Maybe she was out with friends. But when the minutes stretched into hours, he tried calling her over and over, and he got no answer. That wasn't like Cynthia. She always picked up when he called no matter where she was or what she was doing. It was an unspoken family rule. Answer the phone, no matter what. Whether they were at church, school, or in the middle of something, every Hoffman family member had a cell phone, and they knew to pick it up when Tim called. They never ignored him. They always made sure to respond. But with every text, the "where are you?" the "call me, are you okay?" Tim got no response. Still, he tried to reassure himself. She's 19. She's an adult, trying to establish her independence. She's going to call back soon. But as the night wore on and the silence grew heavier, that fatherly instinct, the one that guided him through every stage of Cynthia's life, it really began to gnaw at him. He felt like something just wasn't right. But he decided to get some rest, hoping that by the next morning his phone would be buzzing, it would light up with messages from her. But deep down, he just had this really unsettling feeling, and he just really couldn't shake it. And when the next day came, June 3rd, and Cynthia still hadn't returned any of his calls or his texts, his worry only got more intense. It was unlike her not to reach out, and Tim began to fear for her safety. Then he called Denali, who he still knew as Angel, because if anyone knew where Cynthia was, it would be her best friend. Denali picked up right away, and she was helpful when Tim asked if she knew what Cynthia had done the day before. She was like, "Oh yeah, we hung out." And then Tim felt relieved for a moment, until Denali said something else. "She told me to drop her off at the polar bear playground." He was like, "The polar bear playground?" Sure, this was a familiar place, somewhere Cynthia enjoyed as a child, and she did sometimes go to that park with friends. But why would Cynthia leave Denali and get dropped off there alone? Now that did not sound like his daughter. Who was she with? Because she hated being alone. So she had to be there with someone, had to be meeting someone. Because knowing his daughter, he knew she would never go anywhere alone because she was so afraid of getting lost. His gut was screaming at him now that something was wrong. He hung up with Denali and he started calling everyone he could think of, and no one had seen her. He wasn't going to sit around though. He was going to find his daughter, so he jumped on his motorcycle and he started looking. He went to Rush and Jack Springs Park, where the polar bear playground was located. It spanned 300 acres, and one of its features was this polar bear playground. This was an area where children could climb and slide on a massive polar bear-shaped structure, hence the name. Tim searched the trails. He called out his daughter's name over and over again, and there was nothing. And during the search, Timothy stayed in contact with Denali, who expressed her concern for Cynthia in her messages. She wrote, "I hope she comes home safely. She's my best friend." And while Tim appreciated everyone's concern, that alone wouldn't bring his daughter back. So he went to Anchorage Police Department and he filed a missing persons report. He couldn't believe that his daughter was just gone, just nothing, just vanished out of nowhere. And you also have to realize that this was his father's biggest fear. We all fear for our children, but because of Cynthia's special characteristics, it intensified this fear, which is now a reality for him. And this poor man, he was frantic. He organized search parties. He was rallying family and friends around and anyone willing to help in the desperate effort to find Cynthia. He refused to just sit back and wait for answers. He took to the streets on his motorcycle again, covering as much ground as possible. He scoured the winding roads. He checked the hidden corners of the city. He combed through the dense woods and trails, calling out her name, hoping for any sign or any clue that would lead him to Cynthia. He was prepared to search until he could bring her home. That same day, the Anchorage police knocked on the door of Nicole House. Now, this was Denali's biological mom's house. Apparently, ever since Denali became an adult, she got in contact with her biological mom, and they had just recently reconnected about 6 months earlier. Nicole actually called the police over to her house, telling them she thought she might have some information pertaining to Cynthia's disappearance. And since Denali seemed to be the last person who saw or spoke to Cynthia, this piqued the officer's interest. And what Nicole told them changed everything in this investigation. She proceeded to tell the police that her daughter had come over to her house the day before with a boy that she thought might be named Anthony, but she wasn't sure. But it was what Denali said to her mom that was more than just strange. A joke, she thought. One that wouldn't be like ha-ha funny, so I have no clue why she would consider this a joke. Maybe because it was that crazy? But Denali showed up hysterically crying, so hard her mom couldn't even make out what she was saying. But once she calmed down, Denali said that this boy that she was with, this Anthony person, shot Cynthia and then pushed her body into the river. Now, Nicole didn't believe any of this. She thought it was just teenagers being facetious, like blowing things out of proportion because they were mad at each other. But I don't know about you. I don't joke about shooting someone or killing my best friend, even if we're in a fight. But Nicole said she just chalked it up to teenagers being stupid and saying messed up things. I mean, the guy was even laughing. But when she woke up the next morning and she saw the news that Cynthia was officially missing, Nicole realized maybe this wasn't a joke. So she had to tell the police. Nicole also agreed to assist them in any way that she could. And as for Denali, it starts to become crystal clear that her text to Tim that said, "I hope she comes home safely, she's my best friend," that was a lie. Because there was no hope. And Denali already knew where Cynthia was. She knew what had happened to her when she sent that message. It was a lie that was so cold and calculated, it would actually haunt Cynthia's family forever when the truth was exposed. Because Cynthia was never coming home. And Denali knew that. On June 4th, homicide detectives brought 18-year-old Denali Bremer into the police department for formal questioning. The detective started by reading Denali her Miranda rights, ensuring that this woman, because she's a woman, she's 18, but she's an adult, understood her rights before they began questioning her. And I know that 18 seems awfully young and immature to find herself in this position. That will become even more apparent when you hear what she said. They asked her what happened. And just like that, without any hesitation, she confessed. It all started with a simple text on the morning of June 2nd from Denali to her supposed best friend. She texted an unsuspecting Cynthia, "Hey, do you want to go on a hike?" However, in their friend circle, hike was actually a code word for getting high. Cynthia agreed, but when Denali picked her up, she wasn't alone in the car. She brought along her friend Caden McIntosh, who was 16. She had just shared some pot with him in the valley, another one of their local hangouts. He sat in the back, while Cynthia sat in the front and Denali was driving. The atmosphere was relaxed at first as they drove through the scenic landscape of Alaska, and as they traveled, they decided to stop at a parking lot near Thunderbird Falls. This is a stunning 200-foot waterfall surrounded by a picturesque birch tree forest. It seemed like the perfect backdrop for some fun and, of course, to smoke together. Initially, the mood was light, filled with laughter and fun, just the three friends hanging out together. However, Denali explained that things took a dark turn, kind of chalking it up to being high and stupid, that their conversation shifted to it being such an isolated location that they could imagine being kidnapped. And with that thought, they were like, you know what would be funny? Again, more jokes that are not actually amusing to the normal person. But if they pretended to be tied up and duct taped each other and took photos so they could later use them to prank people. Now already the story seems kind of far-fetched. But okay, let's think about it. Teenagers, they're high. They might also have dark humor. Investigators are still listening, trying to make sense of it all. Denali said that Cynthia went along with the plan. They tied her up first. Denali and Caden, they tied Cynthia's ankles together, and then all of a sudden, she started freaking out. She got upset and she told them to untie her, and she was crying and threatening to call the police to report that they were actually trying to kidnap her. When I first started listening to this, I thought to myself, how would it switch so fast? If something else wasn't actually happening in this situation, and why would she go along with this to begin with? Why would this girl all of a sudden be screaming at the top of her lungs, turning this into chaos and drawing attention to them and threatening them? It just sounded unrealistic. However, a part of me did think that Cynthia would, of course, follow along. She wanted her best friend's approval. She was looking to make her friend happy all the time, so I can imagine her not wanting to say no. That part I kind of believed. In the beginning, though, but let's continue. Denali then explained that things were getting scary. She felt like Cynthia was truly blowing things out of proportion and now threatening to get them arrested. Plus, Denali had substances on her and in her car, which would get her into even more trouble. And that's when she said she pulled out her gun, a Caltech 9mm pistol that she had in her hip holster. Now, if you're thinking, why does this 18-year-old girl carry around a pistol? Well, it is questionable. We'll get to that in just a moment. Denali said before she knew what was happening, Caden, in the heat of the moment, he was feeling scared and threatened. He grabbed her gun and he just shot Cynthia in the head. A 16-year-old just did that, just like that. Cynthia then fell to the ground And Denali said she watched in horror as her friend panicked and she was trying to reach for her phone. And that is when Caden grabbed the phone as Cynthia was lying there twitching on the ground in dire need of medical attention. But instead, Caden made a devastating decision. He kicked her into the river. She was still tied up, bound, and shot, but still alive at this point. And you're probably thinking, why didn't Denali call the police? She had a phone. Instead, she expects these investigators to not only believe that story, but that she just walked back to the parking lot with Caden, got into the car, and drove away. And then later texted Cynthia's dad like everything was fine. For what reason? It sounded completely fabricated. I mean, this could not be the whole story. She even lied about dropping Cynthia off at Polar Bear Playground. And that was to essentially cover her tracks and divert suspicion away from her and Caden. And not only that, they tried to cover everything up by going to another location, Lions Park in Mountain View, and they burned Cynthia's cell phone, her purse, her clothing, her identification, and the gun that they used in the shooting, because they really thought that destroying these items would help them from not being able to get caught. I know there are probably a lot of questions swirling in your mind. My first question was, you call this girl your friend, but you can sit there and watch this happen. And if you're thinking the same thing, it's probably because you don't know the backstory yet. I didn't either. And when I found all of this out, it's exactly why I wanted to do this story. I wish I could say that police figured it out right away, but they didn't. First, they called Caden in because, of course, they wanted to hear his version of events. And everything sounded exactly the same, that it was a joke at first and went too far. But according to him, he blacked out. Now that's very convenient. He's 16 years old, just want to remind you. But he's sitting there, insisting that he doesn't even recall the moment he shot Cynthia. But he, like Denali said, he remembered her twitching on the ground before he kicked her body into the river. His main concern was that Angel, which is how he referred to Denali, wasn't going to get in trouble for any of this. It seemed like this poor boy had been so manipulated by Denali. He was obsessed with her. He wanted her approval. He did have a romantic interest in her that was becoming very clear in this interview, and he was in a very vulnerable position age-wise. Not that that's an excuse, but it seemed to lean towards Denali having way more to do with this. Now this missing persons investigation turned into a recovery mission because they needed to find Cynthia's body. As the search was on, the police went to Timothy Hoffman's door to give him the heartbreaking news that they believed his daughter was dead, and the prime suspect was her best friend. No parent could have expected something so terrible to happen, but Tim always worried about Cynthia, and this was his worst nightmare coming true. Earlier that day, before a connection had been made, the body of a young female was washed ashore in the area where Denali and Caden had claimed Cynthia went into the water. The victim had suffered a gunshot wound to the head and was bound with gray duct tape. Timothy had to identify Cynthia's remains. I can't imagine as a parent, not only knowing that your worst nightmare has now come true, but having to be the one to go to the morgue and say, yes, that is my daughter. But it was later confirmed by the medical examiner that the body belonged to 19-year-old Cynthia Hoffman. Timothy had spent days searching for his daughter, and now he was bringing her home in a box. And following this discovery, Denali Bremer, 18 years old, and Caden McIntosh, who was 16, faced charges of first-degree murder and tampering with evidence. But if you think this case is over, you would be wrong, because there is so much more to this. Right away, Cynthia's dad did not think the story that Denali and Caden were telling was the truth. He was overwhelmed with grief, and he could hardly even get through his day. He relied on his emotional support chihuahua named Bruiser for comfort and companionship, which is at the same time sweet, but also really heartbreaking that this father had to go through all of this. But he didn't believe that this was some kind of spur-of-the-moment decision made by two friends, and he wanted Caden to be held without bail and was really upset when the judge decided to set bail at $100,000 instead. I could see how frustrating that would be. Then in one of her court appearances, Denali expressed remorse for her actions, acknowledging that she understood what she did was wrong. She said, I know that I probably could have done something different. You think? I mean, yeah, you could have, not agreed, not brought a gun, called 911 about your friend being shot. She even expressed her concern for her daughter. Now, her daughter. She had to put her daughter up for adoption. We'll get into more of this later. But Denali worried about how her daughter would view her as she got older and began to know the details of the case. And I think she was trying to get sympathy by saying all that, like, oh, I'm worried, I have a daughter. I'm not really sure. But during the hearing, Denali stated that she could not afford an attorney, and she requested a public defender. The judge set her bond at $100,000, just like Hayden's. And then a few days later, on June 9th, someone else was arrested, a 19-year-old named Caleb Leland, and he faced charges of first-degree murder and conspiracy to commit murder. There were also 2 juveniles that were arrested in connection to this crime, but their identities were sealed due to their age, and their cases were held by the Division of Juvenile Justice, so I will not be going into all that. I only wanted to add that to say they also disclosed information that implicated Denali. But when 19-year-old Caleb gets into court, he looks like he's completely confused about what's going on. The judge also set his bail at $100,000, and it was a confusing time for Cynthia's family, to say the least, because they were in the dark about what really happened. They're seeing all these arrests, they're seeing all these people have bail set and get out, but they're not aware of what happened to their own loved one. To backtrack, right after Denali's story was told, the investigators did a full forensic search on her electronics, and that is when they uncovered a lot of information. Social media posts, videos, things that she thought she had deleted. And it was painting a much deeper and darker motive than anyone imagined, and I'm not even trying to be dramatic. So let's start with the more public-facing videos. People online, the cyber sleuths, they were recording screenshots and they were sending them to police as evidence, because right after all of this started to unfold, Denali's already on Snapchat, where I guess she might have felt like she was safe. Recall how Snapchats are deleted after a certain time? She went on there and she shared her emotions, the way that she felt about what was going on in her life, and how sad she was that everything was happening to her. When in reality, a girl is dead, but she let her followers know that if they were wondering what happened, she's not responsible. She did not shoot her best friend. She wanted to make that clear.
Look, so for all of you who are asking what really happened, I did not shoot her.
Her explanation is that she was actually held at gunpoint.
Honestly, I was held at gunpoint and told to do whatever he says and I'll live.
Which is a deviation from what she told the investigators. Now she's spinning a narrative that she's the victim. Okay, but you could have called the police afterward. And then she went on to say that she was so upset that Caden, the trigger man, was getting out on bail, but she's sitting there with her independence still intact.
I just heard that evidently Caden Brian McIntosh, the guy that shot my best friend in front of me and all y'all haters saying that I was involved in it, just got out on bail.
But the way she explained it was that this person killed her best friend right in front of her. Then she goes on to say that she's scared because Caden is getting out and he can hurt her. And then you kind of hear her mom in the background saying, I have guns.
I'm actually kind of scared. Because
I have guns.
I know you have guns, Mom, but still. And I don't want to die before I can testify against the mother who killed my friend.
I guess the apple doesn't fall that far from the tree, does it? And don't think that I'm being super judgmental. I mean, I am judging. I will say that. But you have to remember, this is the woman whose boyfriend allegedly killed one of her newborn babies. The mother who had her child taken away from her because all that was going on in her household. So I think it's safe to say it wasn't a very nurturing environment. But Denali went on to explain, no, it's not that. I just don't want to die before I can testify against this bleep who killed my best friend. Now, I want to give her some credit for weaving this narrative, because when you hear how it actually happens, I don't think you're going to be able to have even a tiny ounce of sympathy. Not that you already did at all.
All y'all saying that I'm fake and that I had something to do with it and that I used her and that he was my boyfriend, that I'm dating somebody else.
Then she comes back onto Snapchat later. Her voice is calm. There's a guy walking around in the background and she says that she's sorry, that she didn't mean to do it. She's trying to seem remorseful.
I'm sorry. I didn't mean to do it. I didn't mean to do it.
However, the disturbing discoveries did not stop there. As investigators examined Denali's phone more thoroughly, they uncovered a string of disturbing messages and exchanges between Denali and a person named Tyler, and a video and photos of the actual attack on Cynthia, as in while it was going on, while she was being duct taped. And it didn't look as innocent as Denali had initially said it was, especially because it seemed there was some kind of sexual motive to it. Yeah, like a sick fantasy being carried out for this Tyler person. From the messages, it appeared that Denali had been corresponding with this guy Tyler for months. He appeared to live in Kansas and met Denali on a dating site where they began a somewhat, I want to categorize it as a romantic type relationship, but it seemed to center around Denali offering pictures of herself for cash and Tyler seeking out this sort of arrangement. Well, they were both seeking out these sort of arrangements. It was part of how Denali paid for things like substances, which she also sold. So she was selling drugs and her body, not just online through pictures and videos. Think OnlyFans, except confined to messages, not a website, but she was also meeting men in person. And eventually, that's how she became pregnant at 18 from one of those encounters. And it got her deeper and deeper into taking more substances, eventually graduating to harder and more illicit ones. Hence, the reason why she said she had to carry a firearm, because she said it was a very risky business. It started with a message, a simple flirty DM. Hey, beautiful. Denali was used to attention. She was bold, loud, the kind of girl who always had a new guy texting her. But this one was different because Tyler was rich, crazy rich. I told you Cynthia had witnessed her friend giggling and glued to her phone. It was Tyler she was talking to. His profile picture, remember, it showed a handsome guy standing in front of a sleek sports car, looking like something out of a Hollywood movie. And he acted obsessed with Denali. The classic love bombing, the sort of like, you're so special, I never met a girl like you, I want to take care of you. It was the kind of fairy tale that some teenage girls secretly dream about. A Prince Charming to sweep them off their feet. And Denali just ate it up. Because Tyler wasn't just promising her love, he was promising her money. And it started small. That's how these predators manipulate. It started more transactional, but soon he was acting like he was in love with Denali, hoping that she would be willing to do more and more and more for him. And the money was good. Any money was good for Denali, especially when she didn't have to physically become involved with these men. Sending pictures seems so benign to some people. A bikini picture here, a foot picture there. More clothing would come off, the stakes would get even higher, the pictures more explicit, but Denali still felt somewhat safe doing all this, especially when Tyler would call her his queen. It made her believe that she was in a special, exclusive relationship with him. And of course, the money he would send through PayPal didn't hurt. And sure, Denali had her suspicions that Tyler wasn't exactly who he said he was. There were little things, like his name on the dating site was Hayden, not Tyler. But she also went by different names. So it wasn't really a red flag. Even when Tyler started to ask Denali for more and more twisted and perverted things, she didn't think it was that odd, because she had been asked for weird things from men before, which is actually sad, especially considering how young this girl was. Plus, the money that he would send increased. It became more and more when she was willing to do something more and more intense. It was more money than she was used to seeing, so she was eager to please. But Denali wasn't just some innocent girl in all this. She was also pretending to love Tyler to get more and more of his money, so it was like almost a double catfish. The thing is, there was no Tyler, and there was no Hayden. Instead, behind the screen, in a cramped bedroom in New Salisbury, Indiana, sat a 21-year-old nobody named Darren Shellmiller. There was no sports car, no private jets, no million-dollar bank accounts. Just a manipulated predator sitting in his grandparents' house just pulling strings like a puppeteer. It wasn't even his picture that he used on these dating apps. Of course it wasn't. Nothing was real. And this wasn't the first time Darren had done this. He spent years pretending to be someone else online, catfishing women, luring them in, seeing how far he could push them. One woman thought she was talking to a celebrity. Another thought they had landed their dream job. A girl in California? He tricked her into sending him explicit photos only to ghost her. And what I didn't tell you right away was that when Denali's mom was questioned, she said one reason she didn't believe what her daughter was saying was because Denali mentioned this Tyler person and how it was all connected to this millionaire. It was just a lot for her to take in. Even as I'm retelling it to you, it's a lot. Darren knew exactly how to manipulate people. With Denali, he was playing the long game. First, he love bombed her, told her she was beautiful, made her feel wanted, important, and powerful, and kept her addicted to his attention. Then he isolated her. "No one understands you," he would say. "I'm the only person that really loves you. Would your friends do what I do for you?" And finally, he made a demand. It was supposed to be a test of her loyalty, something no normal person would ever agree to. Things that honestly made my stomach turn and are so sick, I can't even repeat them. But I'll preview it by saying he got excited over dirty diapers like Huggies, the actual soiled baby diapers. I don't want you to use your imagination because I don't think you could even get to the level of sick that this man was. This went beyond Denali's sister. It even included her younger brother. I don't think I need to say more, and I won't. But this time, he wasn't just scamming money and requesting inappropriate things. This time he wanted blood. And Denali was already in too deep. She had fallen in love with a ghost. He offered her more money for increasingly explicit content, pushing her to take things further and further. One of his more disturbing requests was that she record herself holding someone down or even fighting them in a way that would kind of impress him. And Denali was caught up in the momentum of their relationship and, of course, the financial benefits, so she complied with his increasingly bizarre demands. Sometimes she would recruit her friends, like Caden and Caleb, promising them money as well. Like, let's just pretend I'm fighting you kind of thing. But when Darren said, "Kill someone, and I will give you $9 million, she wasn't sure what to think. That was until she looked at her PayPal account and she saw a pending transaction for exactly $9 million. She thought he was being serious. I have the actual screenshot of this, and I couldn't help but think, really? She really thought that you could, one, even send $9 million over PayPal, or that someone actually would? But I guess Darren had sent her money before. So at first, it seemed like a joke. But I'm like, kill someone? Again, these jokes, like, that's insane. Why would that be a joke? But Darren kept pushing. Like, think the life we'll have together. We'll be rich. I just need to know that I can trust you. Denali started thinking about it. Kill a random person and get rich. Her greed was strong, and she said yes. But it wasn't that easy. Darren didn't just want someone dead. It was a sick fantasy. There were conditions. Of course, she had to document it. That was one. But she also had to do perverse things. And it became obvious that Darren wanted a female victim. So Denali made a decision. It would be Cynthia, because Cynthia loved her. Cynthia trusted her. Cynthia wouldn't fight back. The second Denali chose Cynthia, her fate was sealed. Denali wasn't going to do this alone, though. She needed help. She turned to her inner circle, the reckless teens, all looking for excitement, and the first person she recruited was Caden McIntosh, the 16-year-old. "I'll split the money with you," she told him. "We'll all be millionaires." Because then came Caleb, the 19-year-old who just agreed to lend them his car for the plan. And just like that, a group of teenagers had signed up for a murder-for-hire scheme, for money that didn't even exist, and for a random person they probably would never talk to in real life. There were messages between the three teens outlining their plan. Denali chose the location, Thunderbird Falls, a remote area where no one would hear Cynthia scream. Once their plan was in motion, Denali sent Darren a message. It's happening. She would tie her friend up, take photos, and send them to him. And when it was done, Darren would send the money. At least that's what she thought. At this point, Cynthia still had no idea what was coming. She thought that she was going on an adventure with her best friend. She had no idea she was walking into a trap. She didn't know, as she laughed and made plans for her future, that Denali was staring at her knowing that she wouldn't be alive tomorrow. And the scariest part? Denali seemed to feel nothing. No guilt, no hesitation, just excitement, because she saw dollar signs. And Cynthia was just a price that she needed to pay. We will never truly know what happened that day. Whether somehow Denali had convinced Cynthia to let her duct tape her and gag her, but I doubt she was a willing participant once this poor girl realized what was happening. Once Denali's phone was all up in her face as she recorded her and took photo after photo while Cynthia panicked. With each snap of her camera, Denali sent Darren what he asked for. Except, as I tried to pull at Cynthia's clothing, She fought back. She twisted against the tape, but Denali and Caden were stronger. It was 2 against 1. This was the girl that Cynthia considered her best friend. But friends don't do this. And for most people, murder would be a moment of panic, regret, a feeling of, oh my God, what have we done? But for Denali, it was just like another task to complete. She and Caden calmly walked back to the car. And they drove away like nothing had even happened. And that's approximately the time when she went out of her way to send that now chilling text to Cynthia's dad. I hope she comes home safely. She's my best friend. When investigators confronted Denali with the truth that the man that she had saved in her phone as Babe was Darren Shellmiller, she quickly decided to distance herself from him. Now, he wasn't a guy that she loved. He was just a stranger that catfished her into committing a murder. By June 10th, Darren was arrested in Indiana, but long before Darren's name made headlines, before he orchestrated a murder from behind a screen, there were signs. Signs that this man was very dangerous, signs that he was a predator in the making, and the people who crossed paths with him would later look back and realize that he had been like this a long time ago, back in middle school. A girl named Jaden Pohl, who had only been 18 when Darren was arrested, actually came forward to tell police that he would relentlessly ask her for bikini photos. And once, he tried to friend her from a fake profile because she would not comply. Now, as the years went on, and Darren's classmates grew up and had kids of their own, it was known around their small town of only 600 residents that Darren would literally ask mothers that he knew for images of their children. Why wasn't this reported like right away? That's what I kept thinking. Then just a year before the murder in late 2018 or early 2019, a young woman named Cheyenne Arnold was scrolling through Meet Me, which was a dating app meant for casual connections, and she matched with a guy named Austin. He seemed normal at first. The conversation was flirty and lighthearted and harmless until one day, Austin dropped a bombshell. He said, I have a personal problem, but I'll only tell you if you do something for me first. Cheyenne's stomach was in knots. It was just like something about the way he said it, the secrecy, the pressure, it kind of just felt wrong. And then he told her what he wanted. He told her the request, and it was sickening. Photos of her changing her children's diapers, and her skin just crawled. She couldn't believe it. She said no. She shut him down completely. She blocked him and she moved on. But something about that interaction still haunted her. I mean, of course, that would be haunting for anyone. And again, I'm thinking, why didn't you tell anyone? She said that it was the way that he kind of tested her at first, kind of gauging her reaction, seeing if she would go along with it. And then later, when Cheyenne saw Austin's location was in her hometown of Indiana, she got really freaked out. And she confronted him, only to find out it was really Darren Shellmiller, an old classmate from high school. Cheyenne took to Facebook and actually shared her experience to warn others about his alarming behavior. So I give her credit. She did try to make it public. But soon after this, Darren sent her a message. He apologized and he promised he would never, ever make a request like that again. But that was a lie. She had been one of his many experiments. Darren had already been investigated for CSAM that stemmed from a claim by a California woman that I briefly mentioned earlier. Just a few days after Cheyenne's creepy encounter, another guy named Dylan this time appeared on Meet Me again. It was Darren, using yet another fake identity to reach out to a potential victim. This time the woman went to the police when he made another disgusting request similar to the one I just told you about. But for some reason, the case was closed, with no further action taken, probably because no photos were ever exchanged or obtained. Another woman named Brittany Meek had known Darren for years. They actually dated on and off in high school, but after they broke up, she barely even thought about him. He was forgettable, he was awkward, he was quiet, just another guy that she used to know. Until February of 2019, when Darren just suddenly popped back into her life. It came out of nowhere. A message from Darren's real Facebook account. Hey, how have you been? He asked her, and it seemed harmless at first. They caught up, they exchanged a few casual messages, and Brittany assumed it was just another old ex-boyfriend just checking in. Until Darren said that he had a personal problem, and he really wanted to get over this fetish that he had, and he needed her help. But just like with Cheyenne, there was a catch. He said, "I'll only tell you if you do something for me first." Brittany just felt like this chill go down her spine. She already knew that she didn't want to hear what he was going to request. But then he said it, and she felt sick. He wanted videos of her doing a little changing of, the diapers again. It was disgusting. I can't even imagine this. She blocked him, deleted everything, and hoped he was gone. But as I said, neither one of these two women came forward. But they only did later, after he was arrested. For Brittany, she said she didn't want to come forward because she was actually really afraid for her own safety. Because he had shown violence with her during intercourse in the past. It had been 3 years since they broken up. And what led her to break up with him was just that, the violence. So that is understandable, but I do realize, some of these people might not know that they can anonymously report someone. If they have the evidence, you can still make the report, but I guess maybe it would come back to her in the end. On Thursday, June 13th of 2019, just 2 days after Darren's arrest, the streets of Anchorage were lined with the roar of motorcycle engines. It wasn't just a ride. This was a statement. It was a father's final tribute to his daughter that he lost too soon. Cynthia Hoffman had made one request, for motorcycle riders to escort Cynthia's hearse from the Cremation Society of Alaska to Faith Christian Community Church. And the community answered. Bikers from all over showed up, helmets on, headlights shining, a sea of chrome and leather moving together as one. This wasn't just about saying goodbye. It was about honoring Cynthia's spirit. It was about standing with her father in his fight for justice. Hundreds of people gathered inside that church, but Timothy didn't want the service to be about grief. Yes, he had lost his daughter, but he wanted people to remember the joy that she brought, the way she laughed too loud, the way she loved without hesitation, the way she saw the world differently, but always with kindness. It wasn't just a memorial, it was a new beginning, a way to keep Cynthia's memory alive. And instead of letting sorrow take over, Timothy made sure that the day was filled with stories and songs and laughter. And after the service, they held a Cinco de Mayo-themed gathering because Cynthia would have wanted it that way. It was a day of remembrance and a day of love. But for Timothy, it was also a day of war, because this fight wasn't over yet. While others were grieving, Timothy was planning his next move, because the very next morning, he had a court hearing. At 8:30 a.m., he would be standing in front of the people who had stolen his daughter's life. And he had one mission. He said, "Excuse my French, but I'm going to send them to hell." I mean, those words weren't even that bad. I was expecting something way worse. But he was strong. He wasn't just a grieving father, he was a man on a mission. And no matter how long it took, he was going to make sure the monsters who did this to his daughter were going to pay. He promised to be there for every legal proceeding, starting with the federal CSAM charges against Darren in August of 2019, including conspiracy to produce the material, receipt of the material, and distribution, as well as coercion and enticement of a minor, which he of course pled not guilty to. And then it was the state's turn, the 2 counts of first-degree murder, and again, he entered a plea of not guilty. During the court appearances, Cynthia Hoffman's family made sure that Darren could not escape the weight of what he had done. They placed a large frame photo of Cynthia in clear view, a picture that captured her radiance as she stood before a mural with painted wings behind her, making it look as though she was an angel. It was a deliberate choice. Timothy Hoffman wanted Darren to see Cynthia's face, to confront the life that he had stolen, and to remember the devastation he had left behind. Timothy pleaded with the court to deny Darren bail and not let him have any access to the internet, fearing what he might do if he was given even the slightest bit of freedom. Timothy clutched a cross necklace that was hanging around his neck, and he explained that it held the physical remains of his daughter, her ashes, carefully sealed inside. That necklace was the memories of laughter, and that's all he had left. As Timothy spoke, Darren just shook his head. But Cynthia's father stood strong. It was everything. It was his grief, it was his rage, and his love for his daughter, and it filled the courtroom. It was standing room only in that courtroom when the girl who lured Cynthia to her death, the boy who pulled the trigger, and the mastermind who ordered it all from behind the screen sat there at the defense table. Denali Bremer, Caden McIntosh, and Darren Schillmiller, their heads low, looking nothing like the people they had pretended to be. Denali wasn't a powerful queen. Caden wasn't a fearless shooter. Darren wasn't a rich mastermind. They were just people who had thrown their lives away. And now they were about to face the consequences. Cynthia's father had waited years for this moment. He stood up, he walked to the witness stand, he looked directly at Denali Bremer, and he didn't hold back. He talked about how his daughter was developmentally delayed, how she saw the world in different ways. She trusted people who didn't deserve her trust, and how Denali was supposed to be her friend. But instead, she made her beg for her life. She tied her up like an animal and laughed while she cried. Those were his words. Denali wouldn't look at him. Darren stared at the table, but Timothy wasn't done. He told them that they stole his baby girl from him, and now he hopes they never see the outside of a prison cell again. The courtroom was completely silent. Caleb Leland, he was sentenced to 30 years for conspiracy to commit murder. He was the one that provided the car. His final words, he claimed he didn't think that they were going to go through with it. Well, unfortunately, conspiracy happens beforehand. So, still guilty. Then there was Caden McIntosh, the shooter. He pleaded guilty to second-degree murder and he was sentenced to 45 years in prison. In his final words, he claimed that he blacked out and he didn't remember pulling the trigger. Darren Schillmiller, the mastermind behind it all, was given 99 years in prison for solicitation to commit murder, an additional 30 years for those CSAM charges, with no possibility of parole. His final words, he showed no emotion. He said nothing. And then there was Denali Bremer, the best friend. She also got 99 years in prison for first-degree murder and an additional 30 years for the federal CSAM charges. Her final words were her crying and asking for a second chance. The judge didn't care. Cynthia doesn't get a second chance. She's gone. And this isn't the last time we're going to hear from Denali, because I want you to hear a prison interview that she did in just a moment. But first, there was another tragedy that happened to this poor family. After the trial, Timothy Hoffman refused to let Cynthia be forgotten, and every year, on the anniversary of her murder, he organized a motorcycle memorial ride. Hundreds of bikers on a long winding road and a father riding in the honor of his little girl. The first memorial ride was small with just a few close friends, but as the years passed, it grew bigger and bigger, and more bikers joined in, and more people came to stand with Timothy. And every year, he led the ride with his motorcycle with Cynthia's name on his back. They followed the same path that Cynthia once walked, and the ride was supposed to be a tribute, a way to say that you will never be forgotten. But on June 2nd of 2023, Timothy Hoffman rode out there with 50 other people, and the plan was simple. First stop was breakfast at the Carousel Lounge. Next, it was riding through the trails, and their final stop was Thunderbird Falls, where Cynthia had taken her last breath. But Timothy never made it there. At 1:30 p.m., as they were riding down the park's highway, something happened. Timothy's motorcycle lost control. He veered off the road and the bike flipped. His wife was on the back, and both of them were thrown onto the pavement. Bikers were screaming. They rushed to help them, but Timothy was unresponsive. When the paramedics arrived, he was rushed to the hospital, but sadly did not survive. Timothy's wife did survive the crash, but suffered a skull fracture, a broken back, and had to go through multiple surgeries. I'm sure this is shocking to hear, and the community was in total disbelief. Timothy had spent 5 years fighting for Cynthia, and on the 5th anniversary of her death, he was gone too. Cynthia's mom said about Tim that the only thing he ever wanted was justice for our daughter, and now they're together again. Sometimes I can't believe that these things are actually real. The Hoffman family lost 2 people. Cynthia because she trusted the wrong friend, and Timothy because his grief never let him rest. Cynthia's story isn't just a tragedy, it's also a warning. It's a reminder that the internet can be a dangerous place. Social media is supposed to connect us, but there are other Darren Schillmillers out there. There are predators with another lie just waiting in someone's inbox. So the real question is, how do you know the person that you're talking to online is even real? In the end, Cynthia wasn't killed by a stranger in a dark alley. She was killed by someone that she loved and trusted. And all it took was the wrong person whispering in her friend's ear. So what can we take from a story like this? Question people. Question the things that you see and read online. Not everyone you call a friend is really your friend. If something feels off, trust your gut and report the things that aren't right, because it may save your life, but it may also save somebody else's. I don't like giving killers a voice on this channel, but it's not all the time that we actually get to hear from a prisoner. And Denali did an interview after 5 years of being locked in prison. Court TV released a video 3 months ago where Denali sat down for her very first interview, and David Scott asked her questions about her claim that she was catfished into killing her best friend. They went into this interview thinking that Denali was going to own up to everything she did, explain why she did it, that she wanted to come clean and take responsibility. But we hear this all the time. We just heard about this with Lori Vallow. The interview goes in a totally different direction. I don't think it will ever be what we expect because I think that killers want a platform. They want to be remembered somehow. And they also want people to think that they were wrongly accused and that they shouldn't actually be where they are. But they do these interviews under the guise of, I'm going to tell you the truth. One thing I noticed right away was Denali's stature. She was the same size, if not bigger, than David Scott, a grown adult man who was interviewing her. So that really stuck out to me immediately. And it kind of made me understand why she had so much of a presence and maybe why she was able to control people around her. She starts off by saying that she was advised against doing this interview by her lawyers, as well as some of the prisoners. They told her not to do it. And right off the bat, she starts blaming substances. Abusing substances. And David Scott's kind of like, okay, wait a minute. I understand you came from a really traumatic childhood, that bad things happened to you, that you witnessed your newborn sister dying when you were only 2 and you were put into foster care. And all that is a valid reason that she got into substances. But she was letting it kind of be the excuse that she was in this bad headspace while all of this was going on. But I have to say, I still think she knew right from wrong, but she really tried to play herself as the victim of her circumstances and that she had to sell her body and substances, but I'm not sure I believe that. And what I mean is I don't believe she had to. But how can we really get inside her head? The fact is, she did those things. She carried firearms. She was a dealer and also a user. And in order to fuel all of that, she got, in her words and her perspective, sucked in to exchanging these explicit photos for money. And it kind of just snowballed. But the way that she would just callously talk about Cynthia, even saying that she got in this big fight because Cynthia slept with her ex-boyfriend, even though she slept with her ex-boyfriend and was back and forth. But she was making it out to be like the excuse why she chose to end Cynthia's life. Because she was really mad at her. All of that sounded like more excuses. She even called herself petty, which I think it's way beyond petty. She was like, oh, I let my jealousy get to me. I'm not going to lie. I was really petty. And she was smiling when she said this, and it was really sickening.
My jealousy hit me again, and I'm not going to lie, I got petty, and I was mad.
At one point, she even said, when Cynthia was shot, that it was just problem solved.
Problem solved, right? And
wow, that sounds really
I know,
heartless.
It sounds heartless, but at the time, that's what I was thinking.
And that's so callous. And she said that. She was like, you know what? I know it's bad, but I'm telling you what I was thinking in the moment. Now, I was surprised to hear from Cynthia's uncle, who said that in the beginning, when he found out that Cynthia was running with this bad crowd and hanging out with Denali, he confronted Timothy. And he's like, why are you letting your daughter hang out with this person? And Tim was like, well, she's an adult. I can't really stop her. And I think that's a big fear that parents have. Because at some point, their kids become teenagers and then adults, and there's only so much we can do. Also, I found it interesting that Denali takes comfort in the fact that she's not the person who pulled the trigger. She understands that she's responsible for murder and that she essentially murdered someone, but she doesn't think it's the same as actually doing the physical act of murdering the person, even though she directed someone to do it. But I think that's really cowardly because there's not a big difference. But if it makes her feel comfortable at the end of the day, it still doesn't change anything.
The way, I see it, is I didn't actually pull the trigger. I was just the catalyst. I was the thing that...
Do you think that makes you any less a murderer?
No, it doesn't make me any less a murderer. It just is something on my conscience that I didn't actually be the one to kill somebody. So, I haven't physically taken a human life. I was just the catalyst of taking one, and that is my burden to bear. Because she's dead because of me. That's my responsibility. That's on me. I don't know. There's just something, that always gets me when people be like, well, you shot somebody. Well, no, I didn't. Everybody always tries to come up and say that, but I didn't actually shoot her.
You did murder her, though.
Yeah.
So what's the difference?
She also tried to say the police were coercing her and that her confession wasn't really on her own will. And she really doesn't like to be called the mastermind. I think she would really like it to just all fall on Darren and Caden. She got called out about this in the interview. And she was like, no, I'm not trying to place blame. I just want to tell you how it really happened. Well, she's currently working on an appeal to reduce her sentence. So this interview was all supposed to be about taking responsibility. And David Scott even asked her if she thinks she deserves to be out of prison. And she's like, I think everyone deserves a second chance. And I cannot disagree more. You killed someone. You're dangerous. You're heartless, you're callous, and you're a disgusting human. Not everyone deserves a second chance. If you want to see the full interview, I am going to link it in my description box or the card above if I can, or at the end of this video, so you can go watch it in your entirety. But I'm telling you, it's probably going to make you sick. I think it can definitely make you hate her even more than you probably do after hearing what she did. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. And like always, thank you so much for being here for Cynthia's story. I'll see you in my next video. Bye.